In part 3 of the integumentary system, we're going to focus on the dermis and the subcutaneous region. So we know from our previous parts that the dermis is located just underneath the epidermis, right? It's deep to the epidermis, but it's above a layer of kind of fatty tissue known as the subcutaneous layer. All right, so we're going to find it right in between the epidermis and the subcutaneous layer. We also mentioned in part 1 of this chapter that the epidermal accessory structures, such as the hair, the sweat glands, the oil glands, they actually live in the dermis and then they project up into the epidermis. Right? So we kind of know this already, that the dermis anchors the epidermal accessory structures. We're going to divide the dermis into two parts. The outer, more superficial part of the dermis we're going to call the papillary layer. The deeper part of the dermis we're going to call the reticular layer. So let's take a look at the papillary layer. Roughly the upper 1/3 of the dermis makes up the papillary layer. So let's take a look at the Martini picture real quick. I would say this is the lower part of the epidermis right here. This upper 1/3 here, all of this is going to be the papillary region. Okay, the reason they call it papillary is, if you remember from part 2, these were the dermal papilla, those were the mounds, right? So they call it the papillary region because it has the mounds. On the Tortora book, this is going to be the papillary region all in here, kind of above those blood vessels. Right, so all of this would be the papillary region. So again, like I said, it's roughly the upper 1/3. That's my interpretation. If we were to look at their papillary region under the microscope, we would see that it consists primarily of loose areolar connective tissue, and we would find blood vessels, capillaries, small lymph vessels, the neurons that we had looked at earlier, the sensory neurons in part 2 of the of this lesson. Like I said, the papillary region is named for the dermal papilla, which project up between those epidermal ridges. Now, when somebody gets a condition where they have an inflammation of this papillary layer, they call that dermatitis. You may have heard of that before. Infections can cause it, radiation, mechanical irritation, chemicals, such as poison ivy over here. The area you may see becomes red and have little bumps or little vesicles, that type of thing, and they become itchy and painful, that whole region. We would call that dermatitis. So again, you can see up here in the papillary region, here's some of the blood vessels. Here's a nerve going up in here, the neuron. Right here's actually one of the tactile corpuscles. We'll talk about this in a little bit. So all of this is the papillary region. Again, tortora, papillary region, all up in here, wherever that dermal papilla is. The reticular layer now, that's going to be the lower 2/3. So right in here, this is all going to be the reticular layer, kind of below this blood vessel line right here. This is going to be the reticular layer. This is primarily made up of dense, irregular connective tissue, which is predominantly made up of collagen, and then collagen is what's going to give that part of the dermis strength. But we also see some elastic fibers in the reticular layer. That allows the dermis to be stretched, but then it recoils back. Elastic fibers are going to have recoil. So you can actually see because these lines right here kind of represent like collagen. This is like a thicker type of connective tissue. So all of this is going to be the reticular region. And this would be the reticular region in the Tortora interpretation. Let's make sure we got everything. Yep, so again, upper 1/3 is the papillary layer, lower 2/3 is going to be the reticular layer. Papillary layer is primarily areolar connective tissue. Reticular layer is primarily dense, irregular connective tissue, which has a lot of collagen, and then some elastic fibers as well. So that kind of leads us to what I was talking about, dermal strength and elasticity, right? The collagen, whenever you hear the word collagen, the benefit of collagen is that it provides strength, right? But you can bend and twist collagen fibers. They're not like rigid rods. They do allow the skin to be bent and twisted. Where elastic fibers, like I said before, they permit stretching and recoil. So if you were to pick up your skin and then let go, it kind of recoils back to its original position, right? So you're able to stretch it and then it recoils. The fibers, in addition to water content in the skin, also contribute to flexibility and resilience. So the combination of fibers and having good, well hydrated skin, we call that skin turgor. Here's the way you could test that. If you took your skin and just kind of pinched it and lifted it up a little bit and you let go, it should recoil right back down. That means you have good dehydration. I'm sorry, good hydration. I apologize, good hydration, and you have good fibers. If somebody were to become dehydrated, right, their water content becomes low, what will happen is if you lift up the skin, let's say on the back of your hand, the skin will stay peaked up and will go down very, very slowly. That's a sign of dehydration. So we can test strength and resilience and water content by pulling up on the skin. Usually we do it on the back of the hand, and we call that skin turgor. Let's take a look at how skin can be damaged. So some of the things you see here are reversible, others are just a fact of life. We really can't change them. Dehydration, like I said before, can damage the skin, right? We actually lose skin turgor by losing water, but the good news is that's reversible, right? By hydrating again, we end up having good skin turgor again. Aging, right, we'll see that fibers will start to break down as we get older. Collagen and elastic fibers, they break down. So aging is not reversible, unfortunately. Hormonal changes, right? As our hormones decrease as we get older, estrogen, testosterone, and that type of thing. And then radiation and sunlight also does damage. Unfortunately, it's not reversible, but it is preventable, right? By staying out of the sun or using sunblocks, we can limit the amount of damage to our skin. The other type of skin damage a lot of times happens when somebody gains weight or muscle mass or pregnancy, can actually stretch the fibers beyond their normal limits, and then we have a kind of a permanent damage, and that is called stretch marks. This is just a picture actually showing the reticular layer of the dermis. You can see these thick bundles right here are collagen fibers. Right? This is even collagen fibers here, but these small fibers here that have branching, those are elastic fibers. So you can see a combination of collagen and elastic fibers. And all of this here, as well as with water content, contributes to strength, resilience, and what we call skin turgor. Now, our collagen and elastic fibers actually run in parallel bundles. We call these tension lines. They used to call them cleavage lines, and they resist forces applied to the skin. Sometimes if somebody has a cut in the skin, if they are cut along the length or the direction of the tension lines, the wound will actually stay in close proximity. The ends of the wounds will stay close together and it will heal well. But if somebody gets cut across the tension lines, the wound will open up and typically tend to scar, right? They may need more stitching and that type of thing. So this is just an interesting picture. You don't have to memorize which way they run, but here they're showing you the front of the body, and you can see these are the tension lines. This is the direction that the collagen and the elastic fibers are running in the abdomen. This is the way they run in the upper thigh, right? The middle thigh, all in here. The leg, they kind of more run up and down in the front. Right? And then you can see how they run in the back. So somebody that's maybe a plastic surgeon or somebody that does stitching, right, for them it's helpful to know the direction of the tension lines. Okay, let's change the topic. Let's take a look at the blood flow and nerve supply to the dermis. There are two plexi, which are networks of blood vessels that I'd like you to know. The first one is called the cutaneous plexus. This is a deep network of arteries. They come in right at the lower part of the reticular layer. Sometimes we even see them in the sub-Q. So these blood vessels here, these arteries, are the main feed of blood into the skin. So this is what you're going to call the cutaneous plexus. Then the arteries branch and they go up, and then they now are going to form another plexus. And again, a plexus just means a network of blood vessels in this case. This is going to be called the subpapillary plexus, all this up in here. And then those lead up, and you can see capillaries from the subpapillary plexus going to go up and bring blood right up to the upper part of the papillary region. And then again, as we said in part 2 of our lesson, this is going to supply nutrients to the epidermis. So again, the cutaneous plexus, just know that this is the blood vessels that are bringing blood to the skin, right? Cutaneous. Then the blood vessels will go up and they're going to branch into smaller arteries in the papillary layer, right? This is what we're going to call the subpapillary plexus, and that's going to lead to blood vessels that go up and are going to form capillaries way up over here in the dermal papilla actually. Right, they form the capillaries here, so gas exchange can take place between the epidermis above and these blood vessels below. Now, the last thing I have on the previous slide is if you do or somebody does damage to the blood vessels in the dermis, they'll have an internal bleeding, and that's going to cause a black and blue mark. We call this black and blue mark a contusion, right? What we commonly also call a bruise. So all that is probably some of these blood vessels in here breaking, and now they bleed into the area, and it shows up as a black and blue mark. All right, so again, the two plexi that I'd like you to know: cutaneous plexus down over here. The blood vessels run up, they get smaller and they branch, and this is going to all be the subpapillary plexus. And then they're going to go up and form smaller blood vessels. These are actually capillaries right here that allow now gas exchange between the blood vessels and the epidermis above over here. We had mentioned in part 1 that the nervous system also has a close connection, the integumentary system has a close connection to the nervous system. So let's take a look at what are some of the things that the nervous system does for us in the integument. First of all, these nerves actually control the blood flow into your skin, right? There's certain times that you have more blood in your skin, other times you have less. These will actually turn on some of our glands. We'll get more into that in part 4 of our lesson, the different types of glands. So these nerves will turn on certain glands, and which we had said in part 1 of our video here, our lesson, that the nervous system also monitors the sensory receptors. We had the different receptors in the skin that are connected to nerves, and those nerves bring the information to the brain and spinal cord so that we can have it interpreted. So in the dermis, there are 1, 2, 3 types of sensory receptors that I'd like you to know. The first one you can highlight are free nerve endings, right? These are just nerve fibers, and they sense or pick up pain and temperature, right? So any temperature changes that you feel on your skin or any painful stimuli, they're going to be picked up by free nerve endings. We also have tactile corpuscles. They used to call them Meissner's corpuscles. Right? The newer term is tactile corpuscles. These pick up light touch. All right? They're going to be located higher in the dermis, going to be more up in the papillary region. And then down low, you can highlight right here, we have what we used to call Pacinian corpuscles. Now they call them lamellar corpuscles. These pick up deeper pressure and they also pick up vibration. Right? They're typically going to be down low in the reticular region. So let's take a look. We'll do it up over here. So This first one here is actually a free nerve ending going up. Actually, this one extends up into the epidermis, but these are the free nerve endings that will pick up pain and temperature. Right, so that would be the first one. The second one here, this is going to be the tactile corpuscle. Notice it's up in a dermal papilla, so this picks up light touch, right? If something was to touch your skin lightly over here, this will receive that stimulation. And here's another free nerve ending. Here's another tactile corpuscle. But down deep here in the reticular layer, this big thing here, this kind of reminds me of onion. It has like layers of peel. So this here is called the Pacinian corpuscle or the lamellar corpuscle. This picks up deeper touch, right? So you would have to push harder on the skin here to get this to be stimulated. And it also picks up vibration. Okay, so we got those three. You have those highlighted. The last part of this lesson is going to be the subcutaneous layer. So let's take just a look here. All of this, where there's kind of this yellow bubbly stuff, this is adipose tissue. This is fat. So we'll see, this is the subcutaneous layer. We actually go back to some of our other pictures real quick. From Tortora, you can see here all of this yellow stuff right here. This is going to be the subcu or the subcutaneous layer. Here's from Martini book, all of that. So that's what we're talking about now. Just get back to our spot. So the subcu or the subcutaneous layer, some people call it the hypodermis. This is the area that lies deep to the dermis. The main thing we see in here is adipose tissue. There is also some loose areolar connective tissue in there, but what we typically see is going to be the fat. Primarily, we're going to see large artery and veins in the superficial part of the subcu, right? That's what we call the cutaneous plexus of blood vessels. You may have heard this term subcutaneous because this is where they actually give certain types of injections. If you've ever gone for the PPD test where they test for tuberculosis, if you ever watched them give you the injection, they don't push the needle straight into your skin. They actually come in at an angle so that they're getting the needle into the subcutaneous area. So we use that term subcutaneous injection, or since it's called hypodermis, they can also say a hypodermic injection. Now, the amount of adipose that we have is actually determined by some of our sex hormones, things like testosterone and estrogen. And as we get into our studies further, we'll see that fat distribution between males and females is going to vary.